Okay,
Hi
so
dear.
I'm not really
What if
supposed
I
to be
told you
starting
that you
another
can get
story.
more
I
exclusive
still have two in
and more
progress,
exciting
but I
content?
couldn't help it.
You can
I
become
couldn't
a
find any
hokage
Naruto
in a hidden
reincarnation
village
fix
of
that caught my
lonely
interest,
kunoichi.
and my
For
solution
that,
to that
you
was
just
try
need to go
writing
to
one
my
myself.
boosty.
I
The
don't know
link
if
will be in
people
the
will review
description.
and like it or not, but it's worth a shot. If people don't like it, I'll stop until I finish one of my other two. If people do, I don't know. I'm thinking there are a few too many ones like these out there to be taken seriously. Well, now that that ramble is out of the way, there's a couple things I want to point out. If it's confusing, ask questions and I'll answer later. If you get disgusted out by Naruto-chan's apartment, it's supposed to be bone-chillingly nightmarish to those who are on the obsessive-compulsive side. Third, I must warn you that this just might turn out to be a Sasuneru if I have any pairings at all. I can't help it if I'm a Shounen AI fan, and they just work together. So, if you are homophobic, be warned. It's not Sasuneru yet, but there is the potential. I do believe that is it, except the disclaimer. Here it is then. I own nothing about the characters, places, or things and ideas from Naruto. That belongs to its rightful owner. So, without further ado, I present my hand at trying a Naruto FIC. Please give it back when you're done. Edit note. This is a Sasuneru, as of the second chapter. He was so cold, so alone. He shivered in a non-existent breeze, clutching his arms to his chest. A black abyss surrounded him, suffocating him. It pressed at his very soul, consuming him in an ever-existing night. It told him that he was ever a part of him. He would belong to the darkness for all eternity, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. He was powerless against the night, forever trapped within his own nightmarish memories. The scene abruptly changed. From the darkness below him spread out to show a small village. A proud village with each building different from the last. The stone pavement that ran from house to house, speeding in between buildings and winding through parks all across the small place was already polished with wear and weather. Grass grew in the cracks of each cobblestone. Plants lined themselves up in little gardens behind small fences that closed front yards away from curious animals and children. Rolling hills spanned out from the village, encompassing the black abyss and chasing away the night. Mountain ranges stretched out from the ground, reaching towards the never-ending blue sky above him. On one such range just outside the village, familiar faces with long-since-forgotten names molded themselves into the granite rock. People began to appear. Men, women, and children of all ages scuttled about as life was breathed into the scene. Adults bargained with each other for food and other necessities. Children ran around, getting into everything as elders watched over them and scolded those creating mischief. Birds and other woodland creatures called from the forest springing up from outside the village, creating background music for the cacophony of voices shouting about to make themselves heard. In the shadows of a large, old cherry tree, a young face peered onto the scene. A spectator like him, the young boy watched people fly by as the sun moved past the horizon. A wooden rope swing was pushed forward as a breeze swept past the tree. The shadows began to darken as night began to settle onto the scene, causing the villagers to mill about, lighting torches to keep the darkness at bay. The young boy moved out of his hiding place, and he got his first glimpse. A young boy that stuck a chord somewhere deep in his heart, so familiar that he wanted to cry. Blonde hair swayed with the breeze, ruffled and unkempt. His stark blue eyes stood out against his tan skin, making him more different than the other children, that possessed dark hair and even darker eyes. Loneliness sang from those innocent eyes, watching the children laughing and playing with each other. As one child began to creep too near him, the child's parents quickly pulled him away from the blonde-haired boy. Sadness consumed the boy. All at once he could hear the young child's thoughts. They only think of me as a monster. I am a monster. I don't belong here and I never will. He wanted to rush up to the boy, reassure him that everything would be all right. Everyone hates me. He wanted to tell the blue-eyed youth that yes, people did love him, that he would find happiness if he could just hang on a little longer. Just as he was about to reach out, the scene changed again. Darkness flooded back, blocking out all color and life that had once filled his vision. All emotion was drained from him, barring fear, pain, and loneliness. He was alone again, drifting once more in a sea of black. He didn't know what to expect, and what happened next came as somewhat of a shock. He saw a person floating there, an older version of the same boy he had seen just moments before. His fine-toned body was taller and more lean than the young lad, and he had filled out more. He still had the unkempt blonde hair, held out of his face by a black-colored bandana with a piece of silver plating on the middle. The plate was carved with a sort of leaf symbol, a symbol that spoke volumes to him in a language he couldn't understand. He wore the same orange jumpsuit he had possessed for a very long time, and how he knew that, he didn't know. Whisker marks across his cheek made the old face look younger somehow. His blue eyes, that had been filled with longing as the young boy looked upon the playing children, were filled with fear and pain. As he watched, distraught at the scene unraveling before him, he saw the man, for he was no child, to say the least, get struck down by a giant weapon. It looked like one of the ninja throwing stars he had seen once at a pawn shop, except much larger. It struck him, dead in the back, and from the surprise in his eyes he wasn't expecting that. The man fell forward onto his hands and knees, coughing blood up to pool below him on the shadowed plain. They both looked up simultaneously, and saw a man striding forward. He looked almost exactly like the other villagers. Black hair and black eyes that coldly calculated his opponent. Pale skin made the man look like one of the undead. His outfit that of a Jounin ninja from Konoha village. How he knew this, again he didn't know, blended halfway into the darkness. As both of them watched, his eyes changed to blazing red. Little swirls appeared and his entire demeanor changed to that of rage. There was no sanity in those eyes. They had lost all appearance of humanity long before this moment. The blond man shivered. He coughed again, blood pouring from both his wound and from the corner of his mouth. He spoke softly and disbelieving. Sasuke-kun, why? His eyes pleaded with the other man, Sasuke, to tell him the truth. Why had he done this? Why this betrayal? Sasuke leered down at him, reaching into a side pocket to pull out a sort of knife. Uzuratanki? His icy voice purred. Did you really think I would stay with you? That you and I could really belong? Without notice, he leapt forward and stabbed the man in the chest. The man gasped and fell forward, into Sasuke's waiting arms. You were never meant to be Naruto. Sasuke. He sat up quickly, panting with fright. Sweat glistened over his entire body, brought from the adrenaline that was just now retreating from his bloodstream. His arms were shaking as he propped himself up, the sheets strewn about him proving that he had been shifting around in his sleep. A weird taste filled his mouth, and he reached up one of his clammy hands to his lips. Pulling away, he noticed his fingertips came back wet. He must have bitten his lip while sleeping. Then, glancing over at his clock, he knew he wouldn't be able to fall asleep again. Once Hamasaki Naruto was awake in the morning, he wouldn't be able to fall asleep again until that night, even if it was 5 in the bloody morning. Instead, he threw the blankets off of himself and stood, walking to a bathroom just a few steps beyond his bed, and stubbing his toe on a few things lying on the floor. He decided that if he was awake, he might as well be getting ready for school. He entered the bathroom, after walking into the wall, and flipped the switch. A warm glow filled his sea-green-colored bathroom, greeting him with jade ibis near the ceiling and brown tiles decorating the showering area. Naruto reminded himself that he needed to repaint this area. He really didn't like waking up to so much green. He'd much prefer it to match his towels. Speaking of, he thought, where did I put them? He turned a little and noticed a small piece of material sticking out from behind the door. Moving the giant plank of wood, he picked up his neon orange, very fluffy towel and slammed the door. He slung the orange monstrosity on the brown towel rack. Who in their right mind makes a bathroom brown, he wondered briefly, and began to strip. He stepped into the shower moments later, pulling his equally bright orange shower curtain shut. Spinning the dial towards cold, he turned the shower on. Holy shit, that's cold, he squealed, shivering. At least he was awake now. Deciding he'd rather not catch a cold this early in the season, he quickly ran through his shower routine. 10 minutes later, he was roughly towel drying his dirty blonde hair with a second orange towel, the first wrapped around his waist. He felt much better now that he had gotten that dream sweat off of him. The dream was still on his mind, but he forcefully pushed it aside. There really wasn't any time to dwell if he wanted to get to school soon. He didn't think that being late for his first official mind day of school. At least he didn't have to make sure he had something somewhat clean and half-decent to wear. No, he just had to throw on his new and clean black school uniform and make breakfast before he would be able to run out the door and make his way to school. Hunting down the uniform, though, that would be the hard part. Now, where did I put it? He wondered as he surveyed the battlefield that was his room. Deciding to start somewhere, he waded through the sea of used ramen cups that he hadn't bothered to put away, braved the desert of movies and music collections that he hadn't bothered to pick up, and finally made his way to the clothing mountain range of garments he hadn't bothered to Washington moving about the range. He dug into the piles to pull out various pieces of clothing, nothing of which was his elusive uniform. Getting frustrated, he threw the towel he had been using to dry his hair to the side. Kneeling, he began to dismantle the range without regard to the various things that had decided to lodge there. After a further amount of time, he pulled out a black pair of slacks and black overshirt. Shaking his head, he snagged a pair of boxers from the decimated mountain and began to dress smoothly for Naruto. It was one of his best subjects, language arts, taught by his favorite professor, Irika. Naruto made sure he was on his best behavior, and not even having Sasuke in his class again could pull Naruto's brightening mood down. By the time Naruto was in his 5th block gym, he was ready to face anything. He only had 1 block left, 6th block, before he could leave and have Irika take him out for ramen. Plus, it helped that his last class was his favorite one, with a teacher who didn't quite hate him. In the locker room, he was hailed by Lee. "Naruto, we meet again." Lee waved and stopped in front of Naruto, who was changing into his gym uniform. Lee, always a stickler for being on time, was already changed and ready to go. "Can you believe we both have gym under Mr. Mitani?" Lee was practically bouncing with joy. Naruto had no idea who he was talking about. It must have been another new teacher, and Lee must have attached himself right to the man as soon as he found out about him. Otherwise, Naruto would have heard about him a lot sooner. Stuffing his feet into his old, beat-up pair of sneakers, Naruto joined his friend in exiting the locker room. "So," Naruto began, "what is this Mitani guy like?" Lee's eyes brightened, and he began to ramble on about their new gym teacher. Apparently the guy was a lot like Lee, or Lee was a lot like the guy. Also, according to Lee, they had the same taste in fashion. Naruto shuddered at the thought, an image of a much taller and muscular Lee entering his mind. He wasn't that far off either. Naruto had been spacing out Lee's rambling, which probably wasn't very wise of him. He didn't hear the odd teen stop his rant, nor did he hear the hush that fell over the crowd. Then, for the second time that day, a teacher decided to scare the living daylights out of him by appearing over his shoulder. "Why, hello there, young man," the voice said. Much to the amusement of the other students, Naruto gave a yelp and jumped. He couldn't catch himself, so he ended up falling down. Scrambling back, he pointed at the man. Just like he had thought, this man was a much older version of Lee. The same bowl-cut black hair, the same beady black eyes, even the same eyebrows. Naruto shuddered. He never thought he'd see the day when there would be someone who had the same eyebrows as his friend. Angrily, Naruto shouted, "Where the hell did you come from? And what's with all the teachers deciding to pop up magically behind me?" Mr. Mitani chuckled.
"I'm sorry, what?"
Straightening a white tee with a tuttle in the center, he hiked up his navy shorts and brightened his smile, if it were at all possible. His teeth practically glinted in the dim lighting of the gym. Making a thumbs up, he said, "My name is Guy Mitani, and I am going to be one of the guiding hands to lead you from your flame of youth into a blossoming and fiery young adult. Under my tuition, no child here will be left to struggle in their winter of discontent." He struck an odd pose after that, something like a cross between a sitcom ending pose and a good guy stance. Only Lee was cheering on the young teacher. As the rest of the class groaned, Naruto stood and began brushing off himself. He walked over to the far wall, ignoring the teacher who was talking about how they were going to begin playing dodgeball and would split up into 2 teams, and the winning team would get a special treat. It was only after he was leaning against the wall that he realized he was once again next to Sasuke. Instead of fighting with him, he decided that he would ignore the youth and instead stared blankly ahead. Sasuke spoke up. "What are we going to do about the project?" he asked. "Frankly, I don't want to take the class and fail at the end." He crossed his arms, leaning against the edge of the bleachers. Naruto pursed his lips. "I don't intend on failing either, but it's not like I want to get to know a stuck-up prick like you," he commented. Sasuke practically ground his teeth in frustration. "You think I want to work with you?" Taking a calming breath, he reined in his temper. "Look, neither of us want to work with each other. However, we have to do this project if we want to pass. And neither of us want to fail either, so we need to work together. Now, do you want to come over to my house? Should I go to yours? Or do we meet somewhere? I'm not going to fail this class." Naruto glared at Sasuke. "What makes you think I want you at my house? Or that I want to go to yours?" Sasuke straightened. "That's why I'm giving you a choice, idiot." Naruto stiffened. "Fine, then we'll go to your house if you're so adamant. Now leave me alone and don't talk to me." Sasuke watched Naruto go. He didn't want the guy over at his house, but it was much more preferable than having to walk around with him in public. That, and to going to the dimwit's house. Sasuke ignored the teacher, who was beckoning him to join in the team selection, and slid to the ground. He decided that gym was a good class to sit around in, and so he sat there for the rest of the period while he watched Naruto get pummeled with dodgeballs. End chapter. Any questions? Comments? Suggestions? Please review.
Chapter
/n. Alright, I've got this one down. Next chapter should be fun, because I get to try to figure out what they're going to do. Maybe I should bring in Sasuke's brother? Any wishes either way. What about pairings? Are there any people who you readers would like to see get together? I'd love some feedback, since I'm trying to make this reader-friendly, meaning I want to make sure to take your opinion into consideration. How about some situations you want me to attempt to write? I'm glad some people are still reading this story, even if it isn't popular and it is an AU reincarnation one. I'm having fun writing it, as long as I don't get writer's block. So I'll probably keep writing this even if people never look at it again. I'll know it's there, and I'll eventually go read it after I've finished posting it. Yeah, it's a bit short. Should I start making chapters longer? If I do, it'll take me longer to update, but let me know. But I had a place to stop and nothing to write in between other than this scene. I'm sure you'll figure out who is in the painting, as it's pretty obvious. To all but Naruto, that is. I do have some terms in here that may or may not be known, so if you have questions on it, just ask. Also, I'm not sure if I'm getting people in character, so let me know if I'm murdering someone's personality. Also, I really do want your opinion on things. Even if you don't want a review and just want to send me a message, I'd appreciate it a lot. My email, and this is the only time I will post it in this story, is shortygaljelly, toast, net, without the spaces. If you do email me, write best friend as the subject, since that's the song I'm listening to right now and I'll know where it's from. Enough rambling. Warning. This is a Shounen AI/Yaoi slasher FIC. Susunaru pairing. If you don't like Sasuke with Naruto, or if you are homophobic, too bad. Stop reading and leave us fangirls to our stories. 6th block. The all-powerful, all-glorious, final block of the entire school day. Normal students looked forward to it eagerly. Unusual students wept when it rolled around. The mother of all other blocks, it was made even better for Naruto because it was his favorite class ever. Art class. Plain and simple. Where else could you not be required to have any talent whatsoever and pass? And if you had even an iota of natural talent for the subject, you passed practically everything. So it was with through-the-roof spirits that Naruto went to his final class, under Mr. Morioka. He was looking forward to the class. It was the only regret he had about missing the first, dead week. On the other hand, he worked well under pressure. They would have already finished their first assignment by now, and so Naruto got to play catch-up for a while. He smiled in anticipation. Walking into the room, He was greeted by the smell of oil paint and charcoal. He could even detect a hint of chalk dust in the air. The room he walked into appeared disorganized at first glance. Things looked to be just scattered about in no random order until you got a closer look. Then you would see that even if the tables had paint stains, even if charcoal and chalk dust drifted over the tiled floor, everything had its proper place. Naruto was the first person in the room. His 5th class was nearly next door, and he didn't even bother to stop at his locker. He never needed to, since his bag was small enough to fit under his stool. Mr. Morioka looked up from his papers, his cold face melting a bit at the sight of one of his favorite students. His eyes were dark, such a dark shade that Naruto had yet to figure out what color they were, and that was with Naruto being his pupil for over 4 years. Shaking H's head a bit at something he had just read, his dark hair shifting with the movement, he said, "Ah, Naruto. I was wondering when you'd appear. You're behind." Being about a head taller than the blonde, Mr. Morioka needed to look down just a bit farther for Naruto. Of course, he was tall to begin with, so he was constantly looking down on others, both literally and figuratively. Naruto smiled. "Do I have the same spot as usual?" he asked, already moving towards one of the front window seats. "Of course." Mr. Morioka turned back to his papers, grumbling under his breath. Naruto caught "boy," "late," and "toothpicks." He wondered what his teacher was talking about. His question was answered as soon as he put his books under his chair. The door opened and the strangest girl entered the room. She had some of the longest hair he had ever seen, ebony and reaching below her waist. Her face was incredibly soft, appearing like it was always ready to break open into a smile. She also had the softest brown eyes Naruto had ever come across. She was most definitely new. Naruto would have remembered a pretty face like hers. Shuffling into the room wearing a loose pair of jeans and a paint-stained white shirt, she was saying, "Mr. Zabuza, they said that they don't have any more phthalo blue and won't for a good week." She turned as Zabuza began to curse, and noticed the new student. "Oh, who are you?" she asked. Naruto smiled. "My name is Naruto, and I could ask you the same question." The girl smiled. "My name is Haku, and I'm from the Artist University learning to be an art teacher from Mr. Zabuza." She walked over to Naruto and shook his hand, her grip firm and definite. "I'm incredibly pleased to meet you. You don't know how much Mr. Zabuza talks about you." Naruto flushed with the praise, then smiled in answer. "Nice to meet you as well, Haku. I hope you like art as much as I do. To be working with Morioka. He's one of the best teachers that a student could have." Zabuza looked up, having just been angrily scribbling a note. "Haku, will you watch the class for a while when the bell rings? I need to go yell at someone." Haku nodded, and Zabuza continued. "Naruto needs to start with last week's assignment, and the rest of the students can continue from yesterday." With that, he swept out of the room with a purpose. Haku moved to sit behind his desk, in an old rolling chair that liked to groan with every move. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a toothpick and began to twirl it with her fingers. Addressing Naruto, she began to explain the assignment. "Alright, so this is what you get to do. You make 7 layouts for a painting that is from one of your dreams. Mr. Zabuza will approve the one for your canvas, but the sketches need to be done soon." "That's it," she said cheerfully. Naruto nodded and got to work, pulling out a very full and very used sketchbook. He also took out a chewed-up pencil, then began to sketch ideas. He could always remember his dreams, but there was one slight problem. Each of the people in his dreams looked suspiciously like another person in his school. It was incredibly weird. For example, the sketch he was working on was one of a person who looked like Gaara. Only, this boy wore loose clothing and carried a gourd on his back, not to mention the obvious tattoo of love on his forehead, written in kanji. His black sandals were sticking to a branch, on which he was hanging upside down on. The image was one from a dream Naruto had had after meeting a young, red-headed boy called Gaara. Naruto had been on the playground when he was younger, running under the monkey bars, when Gaara had swung down in front of and scared him. He had been hanging upside down by his knees on the exact center bar. And then, that night, the dreams came. They weren't just the scene of the Gaara look-alike hanging upside down. Either. There had been on scene where the imposter had been fighting both Sasuke and Lee. It was really weird. For some reason that Naruto couldn't comprehend. Whenever he had an imposter dream, it was always after meeting someone new. Like when he had seen Shikamaru sleeping on a hill once, in the shade. His dream had been a look-alike freezing people by standing on their shadow, working with an imposter Ino and a different kid. And then there was the dream after he had seen Sakura for the first time. Actually, it should have been called a series of dreams. After seeing the pink-haired girl, he had had odd dreams of an alternate Sakura for near a year. But that wasn't anything to his dreams about Sasuke. He knew it would have sounded weird to anyone who didn't see what he saw, but he dreamt about the annoying brunette often. He had met the real one during a project, and had immediately hated him from the get-go. But then, when he had fallen asleep, he had had a dream of meeting a different Sasuke. His relationship with the other boy had been basically the same as in real life, unlike some of his other ones, like he had been fighting Gaara in one of his dreams, but they were great friends in real life. He had thought they were done when, after the first dream, they hadn't continued. He thought he was finished with dreams of Sasuke for the rest of his life. But then, nearly a month later, after seeing Sasuke with his brother on the street, he had had another dream. It had been alternate Sasuke fighting with an alternate brother. And both looked like they would rip out each other's throats gladly. Shaking his head, Naruto heard the door open. Looking over, his jaw nearly dropped. But it wasn't like he was expecting his luck to pick up suddenly, with the way his day had been going. "Oh, great!" he muttered. Sasuke was walking into the room, a horde of girls at either side. Naruto darkly turned back to his drawings. A stroke of good luck had Sasuke sitting on the opposite side of the room. The rest of the students fanned out from his seat, like a ripple in the water, Sasuke being the starting point. It was kinda sad. Really? Haku saw the students enter and stood. "All right, Mr. Zabuza is out for the moment, so I've got you guys for now." Everyone quieted down as the girl spoke. "Your task today is to get as far with your drawing as possible, and then we'll move it to canvas if you finish early." She gestured to the back of the room, where the supplies were kept. "Pastel and chalk are in the back, you know where you stashed your drawings, and you know the assignment. Don't waste time," she added. Stools scraping across the floor filled the room as students began to comply. Naruto concentrated on his current drawing, the seventh, one of a shadowed person crouching. Above the person were a pair of eyes, red in color, with two pinwheel-type objects in each eye. It was an image that Naruto thought would be quite interesting to look at, especially since he couldn't tell which imposter was in the picture. The last line drawn, Naruto set down his pencil and looked up. "Hey Haku," he called. Haku looked up in question. "What do I do when I'm done if Morioka isn't here?" he asked. Haku walked over. "Let me see what you have." The youth picked up the paper with her delicate hands, scanning the page. Her eyebrows raised in surprise, obviously never having seen one of Naruto's sketches before. They should have been called drawings instead, since even the blonde's rough sketching had a finished feel about them. Her eyes passed over the 4 sketches of Gaara, the one that he had of Shikamaru, a third, one of Hinata and Neji fighting in an arena, their eyes completely white with veins around them, and then the wheel-eyed one. Haku set the paper on the desk and pointed to the last one. "I think that Mr. Zabuza would agree with me that this would be the best painting, especially if you can mix enough dark colors to somehow give the impression of the clothing and other details." Naruto nodded in agreement. "I was going to do this one anyways. It's so cool, especially the shadows and the eyes." Haku crossed her arms. "Who is it? Do you know?" A shake of the head answered her. "Ah well, that's too bad. You're just going to have to come up with a really interesting title for this." Then, she smiled and walked over to check on the other students. Naruto sat there, staring at the sketch for a while. He didn't know why, but whenever he remembered the image he felt weird. Like he was flying, his stomach doing little flips and his heart gaining speed as it, too, reacted. He didn't even know who it was, but the feeling came packaged with the image. It was insane, getting excited over a dumb dream. The door opened once again, and Zabuza walked into the classroom. Stormed would have been the better term, as he was in a fury. The rest of the class shrank back ever so slightly in the wake of his temper. All except Naruto. He was used to the professor's odd mood swings. Haku went over to talk with him for a moment. Then the teacher walked over to Naruto. Looking down at his sketches, his reaction was along the lines of Haku's. "This is fairly impressive, Naruto," he said, leaning on his hands. Naruto smiled, rubbing the back of his head. "I have a lot of weird dreams like these, and they get a lot weirder." Zabuza nodded. "Go ahead and start to get your painting ready. There are canvases in the back, but you'll need to pay for one." It was the same routine for the two. Zabuza would tell Naruto that he could have a canvas to paint on, as long as he paid for it. Naruto would agree and run back to snag the best one for his project, and they would both move on. They had been doing the same thing for a long time. Naruto was going to pick out the largest canvas he could find to work on, thinking that the larger it was, the more impressive it would be. However, as he was digging through the stacks of wood and fabric, he came across something that, as soon as he laid eyes on it, he knew it would be perfect. It was not as big as he would have liked. Actually, it wasn't very large at all, but Naruto was happy with it. It was a 2-foot square that used thick pieces of wood. The frame would make the picture stick out farther on the wall, drawing nearly as much attention to it as a gigantic painting would have. At his desk, holding his pencil delicately, he began to draw his layout with intense concentration. By the time the final bell rang, Naruto was full of paint and had finished his underpainting. The base colors down, he was looking forward to being able to work on the details during his next art class. Everyone else was cleaned up and out the door by the time Naruto put his canvas into the drying rack along the right wall. He preferred it that way. He could clean up his area in relative peace, instead of everyone jostling for the sink to wash their hands, or rushing to put their supplies away before they were the last ones out the door. It was like some sort of twisted race or something. Zabuza had left just before class let out to do a bit more yelling at the, as he called them, idiot amateurs who couldn't follow directions down in the office. Haku was doing some tidying up in the room, collecting materials that had gotten away from the students without anyone's knowledge. Naruto went back to the sink and began to wash his brushes. He hadn't used as many as he did when he worked on the final layers, but it was still time-consuming to wash out each of the brushes using soap and water and scrubbing the art utensils with the palm of his hand. He was washing off his final brush when Haku spoke up. "You're a really fast artist. Mr. Zabuza has also told me that you are one of the most talented students he has ever seen." Haku was putting away pieces of chalk, organizing them so that each palette of dyed dust had one of each shade of color. Her hands were a collage of reds, blues, yellows, and everything in between. Naruto laughed as he put his brushes with the others in a container, bristles up. "You have to be pretty good as well in order to go to an art college. That's got to be saying something." Walking over to the sink, he began to free his hands of paint. "What kind of stuff do you draw and paint?" Haku, finished sorting the colors, began to stack the boxes that held the chalk. "I like to paint war scenes and draw cars, among other things." Naruto raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Those are weird things for a girl to paint," he stated. Haku burst out laughing. She was using the counter she was standing at to help her stand up. Naruto wondered what her problem was, since he didn't think he said anything funny. "What are you laughing at?" he asked, drying his hands. He tossed the used paper towel into the large trash bin under the sink. Haku calmed down, but a smile still graced her face. "I figured you'd say something like that. Everyone does." She straightened. "Naruto, there's one problem with your statement. I'm a guy." Naruto's eyes widened. "Haku, a boy? But..." He looked so feminine. The long hair, the delicate figure. Naruto's eyes flicked to Haku's chest and noticed a distinct lack of breasts which he had not noticed before. "Oh," he said faintly, his cheeks glowing red as he realized his embarrassing mistake. Haku shook his head, walking away. "Don't worry. Like I said, everyone thinks I'm a girl." Leaving the room, he called over his shoulder, "I'll see you tomorrow," before he was gone. Naruto walked over to his desk, grabbing his bag. His face was still red, of that he had no doubt. He could feel it burning. Following the girl-turned-boy out the door, He groaned as he realized he couldn't go home at the moment, like he had planned to. No, he had to go work on that stupid project with the bastard called Sasuke right away after school. And not only that, he had to go to his house. He felt the incredible urge to begin banging his head against the brick building. End chapter. Any questions? Comments? Suggestions? Please review.
Chapter 6.
/N. Well, at least I got a chapter out, even if it is short and was written in HTML mostly. That's good at least. Isn't it? Right, well, what's new? This chapter ended really badly, I think, so I might have to go back and rewrite it. My sister says otherwise. If I do, I'll tell you in my next author's note. But, hey, good news is that I've got the next one done. Mostly, well, the entire thing is planned out, it just needs to be typed. Yeah, I'm a curious person by nature, so I was wondering, to my readers, are you a guy or a girl? I'm sorry, I'm just curious to see whether or not any of my readers are guys. I only know one guy who likes yaoi, so also, pairing suggestions are a plus. I've only got the main one, and one side pairing, so are there any others you would like? Finally, my next update won't be until next weekend, not the one coming up at the earliest. Unless I get stuck on all my other stories, but don't count on it. And after that, well, I'll get there when I get there. But don't expect the next update for a good 10, maybe 12 days. Sorry. Anyways, this is a long ramble. Maybe I'm trying to make up for a short chapter? Are there any who read this even? Around the corner, down the hall, past the front doors and out of the school. A dreaded path for Naruto when Sasuke was the person waiting at the end of the road. The young Uchiha had told him to meet outside the main doors directly after school. So, even though he was grumbling the entire way, Naruto was doing what he was told. It irked him that the annoying brunette wouldn't give Naruto a chance to suggest something himself. Then again, he had had a chance to get the bastard over to his house. Naruto's line of thought stopped. That sounded wrong on so many levels. He shuddered. He hadn't meant it like that. The guy was an annoying prick. Plus, there was that major factor that he, at least, was straight. Hefting his handheld school bag, he sighed. His friends had already gone for home. Nobody would be there to help him outstall for time. Lee was going to help his dad work on their house. Kiba had been volunteering at the local animal shelter for years and was heading straight there after school. Gaara was still pissed off at him, shooting glares at the blonde whenever they had passed in the halls. Gaara in a bad mood was not something Naruto wanted to deal with. He didn't have a death wish, and no matter how much he despised Sasuke, the guy was the preferred company when it came to a choice between pissed-off redhead and annoying bastard. Outside, there was no sign of Sasuke. There were hardly any people left in the wraparound drive the school was known for. A few stragglers were making their ways home, talking in large packs of teenage hormones raging on unfair teachers, raving about the latest fashion, or just plain complaining about life and everything related to it. Naruto was the only student just standing there like an idiot. There was nothing around for him to sit on, and if he were to lean against the wall, the brush, shrubbery, and trees would be blocking his view of the drive. He didn't want to be left there, having to walk all the way back home after waiting for who knew how long like a fool. Why was he being dragged into this? Right, he thought, I was assigned this demented and crazed psychology teacher that likes to pop out of nowhere and assign half-assed projects out of the blue. Lucky me. Unfortunately or fortunately, Naruto couldn't tell. He had no more time for further reflection on how messed up his day was. And life and future and, well, everything. He should have just stayed in bed. A long and sleek black car pulled around the circular drive, between the school and a small flora-filled island, to pull up and stop in front of Naruto. Blinking in confusion, the blonde watched as the window rolled down in front of him and Sasuke's scowling face appeared. The mirrors were obviously mirrored. There hadn't even been a silhouette to show that anyone had been in the back seat. Get in, idiot. I don't want to be seen with you more than absolutely necessary. The window rolled itself back up, causing Naruto to snap out of his funk. Naruto growled and stepped forward to open the door. As he had seen in the car, Sasuke was sitting as far on the driver's side as he could, making it entirely obvious he didn't want Naruto's person to soil his crisp and clean uniform. It made Naruto very conscious of his own dirty clothing as he climbed into the car and shut the door. The driver, A stoic man wearing circular sunglasses and a bandana turned his head to the side and said simply, "Seatbelts, please." Then, pushing up shades that didn't need adjusting, he turned forward and began to pull the car off of school property. Naruto glared at the guy's back while pulling the safety unit across his shoulder and over his lap. Hearing the soft click that told the object hit home, he slouched back into his seat and folded his arms. His bag sagged against him, taking up over half of the middle seat. Naruto turned to face the window and watched as the scenery flew past him. The entire journey was silent as the two boys were taken to the prestigious Uchiha mansion, located in the heart of the city on a prim and proper-looking lane with neatly groomed trees and carefully cultivated walled flower beds lining each side of the street. He could just picture the little brick planters saying, "Stay out. There are wealthy flowers in residence here." Naruto wrinkled his nose. He was definitely in unknown territory. Surprisingly, he didn't like how neat and ordered everything looked. It was all too. He couldn't find a suitable enough word. Already he missed the overgrown weeds of his neighbors, the rundown and artfully tilted buildings of the outer city limits. He missed flowers growing in any place they could take root, weeds fighting picturesque plant life for the best and most nutritious soil available. He missed all of the people wandering around, stepping where they pleased, rushing towards the unknown prospects that the future promised to any who worked hard enough. It was incredibly boring. With a start, Naruto realized that with all his daydreaming, they had arrived at the gates of the Uchiha estate. Naruto watched, wide-eyed, as the car was flagged in by a pair of security guards. They looked like they should have been standing in front of Buckingham Palace or something, for all the emotion they showed. The car rolled through the gates, the rough iron obstruction giving a somewhat ominous creak. Naruto watched, his eyes drinking in the scenery, as they passed through a very expensive, very boring landscaped front yard. Or perhaps it should have been called a park, since it was as large as the playground area in Naruto's neighborhood and then some. The car pulled around the gravel driveway and stopped silently. Sasuke opened the door to get out, and Naruto followed after a moment of hesitation. When he got out and closed the door, stepping away with his bag in hand, the car immediately pulled away. Sasuke was walking towards the blonde, and as he turned around, Naruto's jaw dropped to the ground and his eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. The outside of the Uchiha Manor was something from an old novel. The house was an old Victorian that looked like it could fit an entire city block and house everyone comfortably. It was mostly done up in black, the trimming being a very dark gray coloring, and the massive giant held at least 3 stories. There was a porch in dark wood that wrapped around and disappeared behind either side of the building. A few steps led from the paved walkway to the front door, and as Sasuke began to walk forward, ignoring Naruto, the normally cheery youth followed in dumb silence. He had known Sasuke was rich, but he hadn't known the bastard was that rich. It was completely unfathomable for Naruto's already overprocessed mind. He numbly followed Sasuke into the house, where he stepped onto the foyer. It was a large entryway, paved with seamless tiles of expensive-looking white marble and walled with dark cherrywood paneling. Ahead was a large banister and sweeping staircase, polished and gleaming in the sun. To either side were doors, large ones with carvings and gilded doorknobs and looking like they were a fortune in and of themselves. Sasuke looked behind him and saw the idiot, standing there and staring dumbly at everything. Getting irritated, since it wasn't all that great, he said to Naruto, "Don't just stand there or you'll be run over." Naruto let out a question, but it sounded more like a squeak. "This is your house?" Sasuke's indignant look, asking if Naruto was really saying that, confirmed everything. Naruto's saucer-wide eyes didn't become any smaller. When Sasuke started to walk up the staircase, Naruto followed in silence. He was too busy looking at everything in every direction to notice the scowl, even though it was almost always present on the brunette's face, had deepened as they climbed the stairs and made it to the left hall. Sasuke was hoping, desperately hoping, that he could make it to his room without running into his brother. He didn't care if it meant locking himself in the same space as a dimwit he couldn't stand. It was better than being seen with the annoyance when his brother came to call. Of course, there is a law that states that when a person wants to slink away and hide, nothing of the sort happens. Sasuke should have known. It happened to everyone he knew, and it happened to him all the time. So, just as he was about to pull out the key to his room and breathe a sigh of relief, his brother made an appearance. A shadow fell over the door, and Sasuke stiffened. He turned to face his brother, Itachi, who had a scowl on his face and was looking at Sasuke's blonde companion with disdain. Itachi was one of those people who you could look at and just know who was in charge. He carried power like a cloak cast on his shoulders, one that he never removed and hardly ever shifted. With eyes and hair that nearly mirrored his younger brother's, Itachi looked like a much older Sasuke. The only difference that could be seen physically, besides height, was that Itachi had 2 premature wrinkles leading from the inner corners of his eyes and drawn in an angle. Of course, if anyone ever pointed them out, Itachi nearly bit off their heads. Although they were nearly identical physically, personality-wise they were polar opposites. Itachi was a ruthless taskmaster while Sasuke was still a teenager who had, as he was constantly told, impossible dreams that would never prove real. While this was going through Sasuke's head, Naruto had different thoughts. He was thinking that those cold eyes, boring right through him, were going to kill him. It wasn't that far of a stretch from reality, though, especially since Itachi had a reputation for being a deadly businessman according to what Naruto had heard. The fact that whoever had said that meant it in a metaphorical manner didn't occur to the frozen blonde. "Who is this?" Itachi demanded. His eyes flashed to Sasuke. Sasuke drew himself up, straightening to his full height. He felt like he was going to the executioner's block. "He's from school. I'm working on a project with him." Sasuke held his breath as Itachi examined Naruto like a lab rat. Thankfully, after a minute, Itachi nodded. It wasn't with approval, though. Rather, it was a nod that said Sasuke would be allowed to have him in the house, but only because his grades depended on it. If it were anyone other than Itachi, his turn would be called a flourishing pivot. But this was Itachi, in his black Armani suit, and he never left with anything but a cold stare and shuddering people he had just dealt with. Sasuke let his breath out, convinced that the worst was over. But that was another law that dictated his life. There was always something worse. Just before he was out of earshot, Itachi said, "Some guests are coming over later tonight. You would do well to make sure your guest is gone by that time." Then he turned the corner and left. Sasuke glowered at the floor momentarily, bad mood setting in again. Sasuke wondered when it had lifted, and fished out his key. Jamming it into the lock, he tried to tune out what Naruto was saying. Even though he agreed with the dunce, though he would never admit it. "Who the hell was that?" Naruto was saying. "I assume he's your brother. But what's with the metal pole shoved 10 feet up his ass? Talk about family resemblance," he muttered. And Sasuke got the distinct impression that he wasn't supposed to hear that. Naruto continued as if Sasuke hadn't stopped moving. "I mean, what's his problem?" He looked like he knew he owned the world. Sasuke opened the door with a click and interrupted Naruto's little monologue. "That's because he does own the world in every sense of the word." Sasuke stormed into his room, throwing his bag onto his bed. Naruto scrambled after him, politely shutting the door behind him. "What do you mean, he does own the world?" Sasuke stopped on his way to his miniature kitchen, addressing the adolescent behind him. "Whoever holds the most money holds the most power. Whoever holds the most power owns the world. Itachi is the richest son of a bitch that ever lived." He continued to storm over to the kitchenette. Naruto's jaw nearly dropped. He couldn't believe that Sasuke had said that about his own brother. They were family. What had happened to make the 2 brothers so bitter and cold with each other? He wondered. Naruto set his bag down near the doorway, shifting slightly. Now that he was effectively stuck in Sasuke's room, he decided to look around. He was surprised with what he saw. He had expected Sasuke's room to be large, yes, and darkly colored. He had expected expensive furnishings and even the large, canopied bed that sat on the edge of one wall. He had definitely expected the neat organization of the room, and even something along the lines of the 2 large windows flanking the bed and the 4 doorways leading off to one side. But he didn't expect the pictures. In Naruto's mind, the image of Sasuke Uchiha didn't fit with pictures in the image. In fact, had anyone said that the brunette was obsessed with captured moments of time, he would have laughed and corrected them. But the proof was in front of him. No, it surrounded him. All four walls, covered with glossy photographs and inked paper, with wooden picture frames and hardly any color showing from the original walls. Naruto couldn't help but be slightly impressed. He had never known that Sasuke had been capable of something as powerful as photography, and was even more impressed by the assumption that Sasuke had taken all of the pictures himself. Wandering around his room, he looked at the collage of time. Here was a picture of Sakura, in one of her sad funks. There, a picture of Ino and Shikamaru fighting with each other. All around him, Naruto was recognizing people he knew. There were pictures of his friends, pictures of Sasuke's friends. There were even pictures of the teachers. There was one picture that confused Naruto, though. It was one of himself when he had been playing tag with his friends way back in grade school. He hadn't realized he had been photographed. He didn't even know he had looked that happy. He had just been having a fun time with his best friends, laughing and playing during recess all those years ago, which made him wonder, how had Sasuke gotten a picture of him like that? Sasuke walked out of the kitchen, a bottle of water in one hand and an apple in the other. He saw Naruto immediately, standing with his back to Sasuke and staring at something he found incredibly interesting. It took a moment for Sasuke to realize what the blonde was looking at. When he did, his mind reeled while his demeanor remained the same. Naruto felt someone staring at him. So without turning, he asked, "Did you take all these yourself?" Sasuke confirmed it, so Naruto asked the question that had been on the tip of his tongue since noticing the picture of himself. "Where did you take this one?" Sasuke took a large gulp of water. "That's none of your business." Naruto spun around, eyes flashing. "Listen, you bastard. That picture is of me, and I didn't give any consent to you for taking it. I want to know when and where and why." Sasuke sat on his bed, one leg folded under him and the other set on the floor, facing Naruto. "That's too damn bad, dope. I don't need to tell you anything when it isn't illegal to take pictures of people without their knowledge. As long as you don't reprint them," he added as an afterthought. Naruto practically growled. "I want to know. That's me in that picture, in case you didn't know. Tell me." Naruto fisted his hands at his side. Sasuke bit into his apple thoughtfully. Coming to a decision, he said, "I don't have to tell you anything." Inside, Sasuke was wondering why he was so adamant on keeping the photo a secret. It was just a picture, after all. Another part of him wondered why Naruto was getting so worked up over an old picture. Naruto's eyes narrowed. "You son of a bitch." Angrily, he stalked over to his bag and picked it up. Sasuke watched as Naruto opened the door to the hallway, walked out, and slammed the door shut behind him. End chapter. Any questions? Comments? Suggestions? Please review. Chapter 7. /N. Hey, all. Sorry for the short chapter and the wait. A lot has been going on, and this couldn't really be that much longer because of the next chapter's contents. Any longer and this chapter would be a novel in and of itself. And now some news. I was out of writing service all last week due to a back infection. Not my fault, but I couldn't sit right, and I still can't. And I'm just today going back to school. Missed all last week, and it's the end of the quarter, too. I have a bunch of stuff going on the next 2 weeks as well. I get to go visit relatives, and then after that I'm working at a music fest for a couple days. Why am I bringing this up? I'm not going to be able to update at all during those 2 weeks. So that's all I've got so far. I owe a big thank you to Kyoji-kun from Gaia, who gave me Sasuke's scene idea. If not exactly, it inspired me. Otherwise this chapter would have been a lot shorter. And now I'm done rambling. Read and enjoy. Sasuke had always hated parties. They were stuffy old things where everyone tried to impress everyone else. They would all convene on one person's property, the annoying cockroaches of the wealthy world, and try to pick at the dregs of riches that were left over from a successful family. Dinner parties were the worst. During those, Sasuke had no choice but to sit and attend them for as long as the dinner commenced. It was made even worse when Itachi would always make a point of making them after the French restaurants. A full 3-hour meal. Too bad for Sasuke, only 1/3 of that meal was over with. And to top matters off, He was sitting beside the two most annoying creatures to ever walk the planet. On the one side, he had Sakura next to him. She was chattering his ear off about some fashion magazine, wearing a gaudy pink dress and having her limbs weighed down from the sheer mass of gold jewelry that she had decked herself out in. Her hair had probably taken a good 2 hours to do, piled on top of her head and making her look like she wore the Eiffel Tower. On the other side, he had Ino. She was trying to outdress Sakura, he was sure, since she was wearing, if it were possible, an even horrid dress than the pink-haired girl was. Her dress was a gray-blue color and had so much glitter on it that every time she moved, she shed. Her hair resembled less of the Tour d'Eiffel than the Leaning Tower. The weight of all the jewels strewn through it had caused it to tilt to the side. Sasuke couldn't help but wonder if she would break her neck that way. He hoped she would. Sighing, Sasuke flagged down one of the servers and had some more wine poured into his glass. He was well aware of the fact that he was probably drinking a little too much, but it was better than listening to the inane chatter that was brought around by feminine hormones. Friends sporadically had, nor an annoyance upset that he constantly went through when it had something to do with Sasuke. It was something different. When class ended, with a new book being assigned for reading, Irika motioned that Naruto should stay behind. Next was Irika's prep hour, and he could always give the boy a pass to his next class. When the class was empty, and everyone had left, Irika shut the door and faced Naruto. "Something's bothering you," he stated. Naruto wouldn't meet his eyes. The young boy looked incredibly tired for some reason, an unusual change from his usually chipper, bubbly personality. Not many people would know that Naruto had a side like this about him. He rarely ever showed it, and even then it was only around a handful of people, Irika included. Irika waited for a while, hoping Naruto would say something without further prompting. When 5 minutes of tense silence passed and Naruto still didn't say anything, the young professor said, "Tell me what's wrong. I know there's something that's on your mind, and it must be either serious or pretty bad if reading or writing can't cheer you up." Naruto didn't know whether or not to tell his mentor about his dreams. He hadn't told anyone, but maybe it would help. He was so confused by them. He didn't know why he had them or what they were trying to tell him. It was like he was being handed a giant puzzle, but he neither knew how the pieces were supposed to fit, nor did he have a clue as to what the picture looked like. A small internal struggle ensued, the adolescent orphan battling between telling Irika and trying to deal with it on his own. He began to list positive and negative situations in his mind, trying to pick the better option. Finally, when he couldn't counter the fact that Irika had never thought that anything Naruto had ever said was stupid or impossible, he decided to tell the brunette adult. "I've been having dreams," he said, looking up. Irika, instead of concern carved into his features, had a carefully placed mask of impartiality coating his face. Naruto filed it into the back of his mind as something to ponder later, since Irika almost always wore his emotions on his sleeve, and began to describe the different dreams that Naruto had had over the course of his life. Finally, he ended with the one he had had that morning, and then looked up at a very thoughtful teacher. He waited for the man to speak. "Well, I don't know why they're happening or what it all means," he began. "But maybe you should start keeping a journal of them. See if there's a pattern." Irika leaned on his desk, crossing his arms. "You never know, if you can connect them together somehow, you might figure out the why to them, at least. However, I think it's about time you left for your last class. I'm sure you wouldn't want to miss it." With a start, Naruto realized that he had talked all through his gym class. He dumbly took the pass he was handed, written in Irika's telltale scrawl, and, in what seemed like the blink of an eye, was herded into the swarming halls. Looking back on the conversation, Naruto got the feeling that he had been pushed from the class for a reason. He had the feeling that Irika was hiding something, and he wanted to know what. Art was a relief for Naruto. He was able to take his frustration out on the underpainting, adding shading and different colors when necessary. It was a strain to get the right color of black, since they couldn't use the paint straight from the bottle, and it helped relieve some of his anger and annoyance at the dreams. "Those are some furious strokes," Haku said from behind the blonde as he pulled his paint brush from the canvas. "You can definitely tell which one would be you. You're the only one who hasn't tried to blend in the colors perfectly." Naruto blinked, then realized that the student assistant was right. There were areas where the black color was rich and looked like it had been created in a factory, and in other places reds, blues, greens, and even a handful of yellow blobs pulled through. It made the black background seem to swirl and shift as you looked at it, each hue pulling his eye into a different direction, seeming to cry for attention from the viewer. "I meant it to be that way," Naruto said with a small smile, knowing that most of his artistic wonders were pure accidents and unintentional. "It'll draw more attention to the shadow figure."
Haku nodded.
"So, is there a purpose to this? Or is it just a random concoction, like some of the other ones that others did?" Naruto shrugged. "I've just seen it a handful of times in my dreams. It's kind of weird, because it's the only dream I've had where I can't tell who it's supposed to be. But I think it works, a little, if I don't screw up." Haku shook his head, smiling. "I'm sure you won't. From what Mr. Zabuza tells me, you've had many of your paintings in various art shows, and have even sold some. That's no small feat." Naruto flushed from the praise and scratched the back of his head with one of his paint-coated hands. "Thanks, but I'm sure that there are a lot of people who are much better than I am." Haku laughed in response, telling Naruto that he was too modest, and then moving on to help other students and give his ever-important opinion on their projects. The rest of the class flew by, Naruto working furiously on the background to get it just perfect. Since it wasn't a very big surface to work on, it didn't take much to cover it with paint. But by the end of class, Naruto still wasn't happy with how the background looked. He refused to move on until it was color perfect, which meant that the next time he went to class, he would be working on the same thing. Cleaning up afterward, Naruto was feeling much better about the day. He had worked off nearly all of his negative emotions, and he was on his way to becoming his normal, happy self. Until he got to the front of the school and saw Sasuke standing there, obviously waiting for him. Naruto hesitated a moment, then decided to walk past him and ignore the bastard. He was still mad about the picture, and wouldn't let go of that emotion lightly. Not when Sasuke wouldn't answer his questions. He walked out of the school, on his way to the food store a mile or so away from his house. He still needed food. He had forgotten money for lunch again, and hadn't eaten for nearly a day. He was hungry. He had a small tab running at the grocer's, and he was determined to stop his stomach from growling if it was the last thing he did. It took him a good 5 minutes before he realized he was being followed. He turned to face his stalker, which was Sasuke, and fisted his hands at his side, clutching his bag with a white-knuckled grip. "Stop following me," he snapped, before turning and continuing on his way. The footsteps didn't stop, and he waited a block or so before turning to face Sasuke again. "What do you want, you bastard? I don't want anything to do with you. So leave me alone and go back to whatever hole you crawled out from." Sasuke fixed the blonde with a scowling stare. "Need I remind you that it is only the threat of failing the class that I'm even making an attempt at working with you?" the callous Uchiha stated. Naruto walked up to the youth, slightly taller than himself, and glared up at him. "I don't care if you fail. Go cry to your big brother for all I care. I'm not working with you." Sasuke's eyes flashed. "You can't stop me. It's a free world, and I can walk where I want. If I choose to follow you, it has nothing to do with you. I don't have to have your permission to walk, Hamasaki. It does have something to do with me, if you plan on stalking me all the way to my house," he growled. "Leave me alone. I'm in no mood to deal with a stuck-up ass." He turned and started to walk away again. Sasuke followed again. There was no way he was going to fail the class and get another lecture from his brother. He had already been lectured at for failing to entertain his peers the night before, and it would be a freezing day in hell before Sasuke Uchiha failed in anything. End chapter. Any questions? Comments? Suggestions? Please review. Chapter 9/N. Well, this was a lot sooner than I had thought it would be, since I was struggling with bringing Jiraiya into the picture. Yes, I'm including the old pervert, but there's really only one other character that I'm thinking about bringing into the story. If your favorite character isn't here, you can request them, and I'll see what I can do. However, I'm mostly happy with the second part, wherein Sasuke goes to Naruto's apartment. Fun times that, speaking of Naruto's apartment, I have decided that I like Narukuin's bathroom too much. I'm going to model my bathing room after the one in this story, complete with bright orange towels, which I'm waiting to go on sale, but have already found and gotten many odd looks when I nearly screamed and began to pet them. Anyways, I hope I don't get anyone too out of character here. I'm not trying to make them OOC, but if they are, please remember that this is a reincarnation FIC. They aren't going to be carbon copies of their past, so I deserve some character leeway. Final note, I gave all of my stories themes if you haven't seen. I'm thinking that Iris, by Goo Goo Dolls, fits pretty well for this story, but it is subject to change if I find one that fits better. Disclaimer: I do not own anything related to Nickelback, nor any songs from their CD The Long Road. I'm just using them, please and thank you. I lied one last thing. Can anyone guess who the buxom blonde is?
N.
And I'm sure you can. Now enjoy this chapter. Next one is a time skip. Finally, Sasuke still hadn't been shaken off by the time Naruto got to the market. Situated at the corner of Naruto's block and the main street, it was a small, probably family-owned. Naruto had never found out if it was or not, and had the quaint feel of a business which had been alive for decades. The blonde had no idea why the pompous Uchiha was still following him, but he probably wouldn't be able to break away from Naruto's friend. The blonde walked into the store and made a beeline for the packaged pasta section. There was a small area of ramen reserved for Naruto only, and it was never touched, lest the boss, Naruto's pal, decided to attack anyone who made the stash disappear. That is, unless it was someone like the girl who was examining the pile. She had a very buxom figure, her shirt pulling in all of the right places, her skirt just a bit shorter than what was considered decent, and her lips jutted out in a small pout. And the pervert was standing there, trying to help her buy it. Jiraiya Nagano, old yet looking in his mid-30s, complete with smiling eyes and white hair that reached to the middle of his back, stood trying to peer down the woman's precariously cut shirt. He wore a red shirt with khaki pants, rubbing his hands together and agreeing with everything the woman was saying. Yes, there's only one person who buys it, and he's not here. Come now, it's a good deal. 5 for $1. Tell me that isn't the cheapest you've ever seen, he asked the blonde, pigtailed customer. Oh, so I'm invisible, am I? Naruto said. You think you can just sell my ramen without my knowledge? Naruto brought a fist up to his face. The girl stood and blushed. I'm sorry, I was just considering tasting some, she said in her high, definitely feminine voice. I've never had it before, but if you like it that much, I wouldn't dream of taking it. She was slightly taller than Naruto, and patted his head affectionately, then turned and left. Jiraiya sputtered. Wait, don't leave. The girl walked to the register, completely ignoring the old pervert she had left behind. Jiraiya, a hand reached out as if to stop her and make her return to him, couldn't believe what he was seeing. He had thought he'd had a chance. With deadly purpose, he turned to face a ranting Naruto. Believe you almost sold it all. I thought we had a deal, you old pervert. But you broke it. How many other times have you done? Ow! Jiraiya's fist bounced off of Naruto's head, causing said appendage to get knocked down. Naruto looked up with a heated stare to face the white-haired grocer. What the hell was that for? You perverted hermit? You interrupted my sale. Jiraiya's anger matched Naruto's. The customer is always right, and I was right to offer her a chance to buy what she wanted. But you had to go and ruin it. The argument that proceeded was vicious and highly entertaining for the slowly gathering crowd of middle-aged mothers, young children accompanying them, and various bachelors that had to shop for themselves to survive. It nearly escalated to a fist fight, if the cheering hadn't gotten so loud as to break the two fighters from their rage. Jiraiya scattered the crowd as Naruto began to shovel ramen packages into his basket. Idiot pervert, always thinking about women, doesn't possess a single brain cell, Naruto muttered as he got the necessary food he was out of. The white-haired shop owner folded his arms. He waited until Naruto had stood up, then glared at the sun-kissed boy. I hope that isn't all you're buying, he said. I was hoping to be able to sell some of that to other people, not just yourself. Naruto waved a hand. Whatever, just put it on my tab and I'll be going. He walked to the register, unloading his basket. Jiraiya watched in silence, contemplating the complex youth that he had taken under his wing. The boy was growing into himself, and in more ways than one. The hermit was glad for that, and hoped that nothing bad would happen to the teen. He watched with dark eyes, holding more wisdom than could be gained in a lifetime, as Naruto left the store. Sasuke watched Naruto leave the crowded little shop. He caught his classmate shooting him a glare and shrugged it off. He had followed the adolescent thus far, and he wasn't about to turn back now. The neighborhood that they walked through was a shabby place, one that just screamed gang activity and random acts of violence. Nothing was in any semblance of order. The streets, sidewalks, and buildings hadn't been cleaned in ages. There were more homeless people than Sasuke had ever seen in his entire life, and they were approaching a building that looked like it had been built by an unmatched set of Lincoln logs. The brunette wanted to turn his nose up at the filth, only barely stopping himself from sneering at the passers-by. Naruto walked into the building without any regard for how run down it was, and Sasuke barely caught the door. As soon as he walked in, he hurried to catch up to the blonde, rubbing his hand vigorously against his pant leg. He shifted his bag in his hand, wishing he could wash hands that felt like they had been through the sewer. The youngest Uchiha didn't break a sweat climbing the 10 flights of stairs that lead to Naruto's apartment. He had had worse exercise in his own home, dodging girls and women alike who had tried to corner him and foist themselves onto his person. He watched Naruto pull out a key, force into the lock while juggling 2 giant bags of instant ramen packs, and finally get the place open. He addressed Sasuke without turning. "If you're coming in, hurry up," he said in a gruff voice. Naruto hadn't thought that his peer would make it even halfway to his home, and he wasn't a cruel bastard like a certain someone, to turn away someone who obviously wished he was elsewhere. Sasuke raised an eyebrow before walking forward, catching the door and entering the small domain. He shut it behind himself as he got his first look at his adversary's den, and if he hadn't had as much control over himself as he did, he would have fled in terror. If Sasuke had thought it was bad outside, among the lower-class masses, he wasn't prepared for the mess that was Naruto's collection. It appeared as if everything had been bought, used, and left where it lay. The apartment had a feel of a battleground, with random piles of clothing dotting the floor in between dirty dishes, old papers, crusty leftovers, and things that Sasuke didn't even want to know about. He delicately picked his way through, following Naruto and wincing as the youth not only took off his shoes to walk, stocking-clad feet not caring where they stepped, into the kitchen. It was a nightmare. Nothing appeared to have been cleaned since the boy moved in a decade or more ago. Sasuke, having always been fastidiously clean, tightened his lips and closed his eyes. If he could just pretend he wasn't there, if he could just pretend he was in his own room, if he could just ignore the smell that wouldn't leave him alone. "Forgive me if I forgot to clean, seeing as I didn't know I was going to have visitors," Naruto said with sadistic humor. He was enjoying Sasuke's discomfort entirely too much, relishing the way the teen had paled and refused to open his eyes. "I'm not used to people coming over." Sasuke's eyes snapped open. "Just how can you live in a pigsty like this?" Naruto smiled darkly. "Just as easily as you can live in a place that doesn't have a nice, homely touch to it. Your place is like a museum," he commented offhandedly, snagging the last ramen package from the bag. Miso, his favorite, and getting ready to make some. He saw Sasuke wince out of the corner of his eye as he stepped over a package of old, moldy bread, and smirked inwardly. He purposely pulled a dirty pan from the sink, washing it out without using any soap or disinfectant, and put it on the stove. "Would you like anything?" he asked a little too innocently. Sasuke shook his head mutely, his eyes shut once more. Naruto noticed that his eye had started to twitch ever so slightly, and filed it in the back of his mind for future reference. The horrified adolescent wished that he could take a deep, cleansing breath, but didn't dare. The air smelled like rotting chicken sprinkled with growing mold and old spices. Not a pleasant combination. Naruto shook his head. "Geez, you act like you've never been in a disorganized place before." Disorganized? That was the biggest understatement ever. "Idiot, that's like saying my room is only slightly messy. I can't believe you live here." Naruto narrowed his eyes. How I live is none of your business. It's my house, and I'm so sorry that I haven't been home enough to keep it all nice and shiny for you. Sasuke cracked his eyes open slightly. And just what could be so important? More so than having a clean living space? Oh, I don't know, Naruto said sarcastically. A job? Homework? A life? You have a job? A snort. Of course I do. Not all of us are rich bastards like yourself, you know? A glare. I don't make a point of living off of my brother's charity. That doesn't change the fact that you're the world's biggest prick. You can't even keep up decent grades. At least I'm not a mindless jerk. Asshole. Demented ferret. Dimwit. Persnickety. That's not even a word, dumbass. Of course it is. It means that you're obsessively compulsive, moronic imbecile. Brainless oaf. Before they could continue clashing words, the timer went off. Naruto spun and began to furiously put together his meal, his stomach growling in anticipation. He slowly tried to calm himself, as he was spilling more than he was making. It didn't work very well, though, and by the time he was brushing past his glaring counterpart, he had less than half of the water he had started with. He saw Sasuke turn, keeping his person in sight at all times. Naruto sat on his chair, the only clean surface, and dug into the tantalizing noodles. He covertly watched Sasuke as he sneered, winced, though he wouldn't have noticed if he hadn't been watching the teenager closely, and generally disapproved of Naruto's apartment. If you hate it so much, you're welcome to clean, Naruto offered with a mouth full of food and an evil smile on his face. I wouldn't complain, and it'll give you something to stop your annoying fidgeting. Sasuke wanted no more than to attack the blonde, but he was afraid of touching the pile of something that sat right at Naruto's feet. It looked like something that would leap up and attach itself to an unwary person's face, leeching the life from their mouth and turn them into evil, unwashed, gurgling, unclean minions. Sasuke didn't move, and Naruto finished his meal off trying not to give in to the murderous annoyance at the brunette's constant twitching. Finally, having reached his limit and the end of his ramen, Naruto stood and walked up to his rival. Sasuke tensed, waiting to see what dark intentions the blonde had in mind. Naruto crossed his arms, leaning back ever so slightly so that he didn't have to appear to look up to the Uchiha. The young Hamasaki tapped his fingers on his arm for a moment, making the paranoid other twitch a few more times, then offered a proposal. Since I'm about ready to kill you if you don't stop fidgeting, and my apartment is overdue for a decent cleaning, Sasuke nearly snorted with disbelief. You're going to help me. It's obvious that you're going to keel over dead if you don't do something, and this way we won't kill each other. Hopefully. Sasuke really couldn't believe the offer, and couldn't imagine lowering himself to clean the pigsty that was the blonde's living quarters. Still, he couldn't help but gag when he looked at all of the dirty possessions, and reluctantly consented. Naruto rolled up his sleeves. Right then. I have no idea where to start, so pick your victim and do whatever needs doing, I guess, he said a little uncomfortably. He didn't know why he had offered to clean his apartment. He couldn't stand the business, and put it off as long as humanly possible. Still, he couldn't take back the offer once it was out of his traitorous mouth, and so he turned with the Uchiha and began to pick up things that he would keep. Sasuke found a bag immediately and started stuffing it with garbage. Within minutes it was filled, and Sasuke knew that he would be taking a long, scalding shower when he got back to his house. He had taken off his jacket, revealing a white t-shirt underneath, and walked to the door, placing the garbage bag next to it. He located another bag and repeated his task. Naruto picked up a compact disc that had been laying upside down and smiled. I had forgotten I had this, he said to nothing. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. Naruto looked up, saw, and held up the CD. Nickelback, The Long Road. It was one of his favorite bands, and he had thought he had lost it many, many years ago. Sasuke smirked. What do you know, that's one of my favorite bands as well. That was when he could listen to them. Itachi Uchiha severely disapproved of Sasuke's taste in music, insisting that he was going to become influenced by the lyrics of the artists. Of course, Itachi's idea of good music included Bach, Beethoven, and the like. It had caused Sasuke no end of torture, hearing the 1812 overture over and over again in his youth. Really, he had his older brother to thank for his music tendencies. Naruto, glad that there was a safe topic he could talk about and just pretend he was talking with one of his friends, continued to talk as he sorted through various discs that had escaped the confines of their cases. I like the song Because of You for this soundtrack, but it's not my overall favorite. Sasuke crouched, wincing as he began to shovel an unknown substance into the plastic bag he held, wielding a plastic spoon as his weapon of choice. His own thoughts echoed a similarity to Naruto's, except he had never talked music with his friends before. Personally, I prefer Believe It or Not. That started a heated debate between the two teens over which song was better, which led to the merits of hard rock versus metal, and then to a debate between artists and music styles. Before either of them knew it, the living room was 25% cleaner than it had been, and it was nearing 8 in the evening. By silent agreement, as Sasuke left, they would uphold a truce as they plowed through the war-torn apartment that belonged to the blonde student. Outside of that, however, it was anything goes. But it was progress and a truce that would hold for some time. End chapter. Any questions? Comments? Suggestions? Please review. Chapter 10. /N. Well, now I've got the time skip. And we're getting somewhere. And, since I couldn't think of anything to do with any other story, nor anything for a one-shot, I wrote this. Which was a lot of fun, since you find out what Gaara does, and you also get a new dream. X3 The plot is thickening slowly. Right, well, special thanks to all supporters of this story. I forgot to mention this before, but when I asked for help, Recyclables got the largest response. It seems that even though ACE and NE are my most popular stories, Recyclables has more fans who are loyal and don't want it to die. I was pleasantly surprised, and so kudos and cookies to everyone who has ever read this. I wouldn't be able to do this without you. In answers to questions or speculation, the blonde from the previous question is the Oryoke no Jutsu, sexy no Jutsu, if you don't know, reincarnation. Just wanted to do something with that. Also, the last chapter was needed to get them to set aside their differences. Otherwise, this wouldn't be a Sasuneru. And now, no more rambling. This is in honor of school, starting tomorrow, and just because I'm a twisted fangirl who has to torture my favorite characters. X3 Enjoy. Sasuke glared at the bathroom. He couldn't believe that anyone, not even Naruto, could pick such a horrific color scheme. Who in their right minds put a ridiculous color like neon orange in an otherwise calm and collected, revitalizing bathroom? Apparently, annoying blonde idiots who seemed to have an affinity for eye-straining colors. It had been weeks since the two teens were assigned the project together. They had just had their midterms a week ago, and had a further 3.5 weeks until the finals. In that time, they had to know each other a little more. Just a little, as they still fought almost daily, and many times the fights had nearly escalated to physical brawls. With little to no help from the sunny student, Sasuke had worked at getting Naruto's apartment to rights again. There were times when, had Sasuke been less of a man than he was, he would have gone into crying hysterics and babbled incoherently from the things he had found. There were things so bad, things that Sasuke hadn't even seen in his worst nightmare, or so he supposed, since he still couldn't remember his dreams. Things that made him wince, shudder, and break out into a cold sweat when he thought about them. However, he persevered. Now, all that was left in the trash heap that was Naruto's home was the bathroom. The tasteless, horrid, fashion black mark room that made designers cry when they saw it. It was nearly as bad as the other rooms. Sasuke had thought that the kitchen was bad before, but that didn't hold a candle to the bathroom. The only thing that was somewhat clean was the shower, and that had mildew starting on it. There wasn't a fan to take away most of the humidity when the shower was used, which had only bred the mold, moss, and other fuzzy questionables that grew on the walls, corners of the floor, in the sink, and out of the toilet. Sasuke had to wonder if anyone would be able to salvage the room, in the end. Naruto poked Sasuke in the back, causing the boy to jump. "Oi! What's so special about the bathroom? Haven't you ever seen one?" he asked with a smirk. Sasuke turned to glare at him, and Naruto noticed with the air of a plotting evil mastermind that he had gotten Sasuke's eye to twitch. Again, that brought the total amount of times Naruto could be that. Annoying up to 1,753. And counting. How can you live in a place where you can't even use the bathroom? Sasuke asked, closing his eyes and trying not to blow up. He didn't know if he would attack the smiling annoyance, or just break down then and there. Naruto rubbed the back of his head. I have a key to the old geezer's place. I just go there if I need to use the bathroom while I'm here. Besides, I'm not home a lot anymore. Not since Mr. Hatakanaka started this whole thing, he added informatively. Sasuke had just spent 4.5 hours finishing up cleaning the bedroom. He refused to tackle the bathroom at that moment, and made the decision obvious when he stormed past Naruto and put the cleaning supplies away in a neat fashion, under the cleanly sparkling sink, in the surprisingly spacious kitchen. He turned around, nearly running into Naruto. The adolescent was staring at him intently, causing Sasuke to become uneasy. He didn't know it, but Naruto's dreams had taken a different turn. They were getting clearer and clearer, and they were starting to seem as if they were a different life. It scared the blonde immensely when he started to experience odd emotions coming with the dreams, especially when nearly every dream with the imposter Sasuke came with an emotion that resembled love a little too much for his taste. Naruto was lost in thought, until Sasuke broke his reverie. I know that I'm good-looking, but that's sad if I'm attracting idiots like you, he said with his self-important smirk. The bastard. Naruto couldn't help the slight blush that brushed his cheeks. Though. Shut up. I was just thinking. He had a sudden urge to stick out his tongue childishly, but that would just earn him a scathing remark from the fairly stoic brunette. Be sure you don't hurt yourself by thinking too much. So much for not receiving an insult. Naruto supposed he walked right into that one. An awkward silence fell over the two, a clock ticking away cheerily somewhere in the background. Naruto shifted as Sasuke's gaze pierced through him. It was becoming incredibly uncomfortable, and he wanted to do something about it. Anything to stop the staring. He got an evil idea. Hey, I want to go visit a friend, he announced. Sasuke blinked. Oh? And just what does that have to do with me? He folded his arms over the white shirt that belonged to his uniform. It was getting colder and colder, as summer slowly transformed into fall, and so the shirt was long-sleeved this time. Hey, you're the one who wants to pass the class, Naruto pointed out as he ran into the bedroom. He shut the door and locked it, quickly stripping and changing into some, mercifully, clean clothing, a pair of ragged jeans and a black shirt that read, in bold white lettering, I'm ninja, you can't see me, on it. He walked out and smiled inwardly at Sasuke's scoffing look and the twitching eye. 54. He motioned for the Uchiha to follow him, slipping on a pair of old tennis shoes and grabbing his keys from a hook that the brunette youth had so kindly installed a week ago. Sasuke followed him out, thinking about what he had learned about the blonde. He was a lot more complicated than Sasuke had first thought, his mind more complex than Shikamaru's. The young student had learned that Naruto liked to write and draw, and that he was incredibly good at art. In retrospect, he couldn't count more than 10 without taking off his shoes. It also seemed that the chipper adolescent could only ever find odd jobs to work at to pay the bill, even though he ought to have been receiving a stipend from the city for being an orphan. They also shared incredibly similar tastes. They liked nearly all the same bands and forms of music, had the same like of a decent Sunday. Naruto had been shocked to find that Sasuke was an avid fan of fresh strawberries over chocolate ice cream, and enjoyed reading similar material. However, they also had their differences. A gaping example was their taste in fashion, and the amount of tact they used when people insulted them. Naruto was a fan of sticking up for his thoughts and beliefs no matter what, oftentimes standing and shouting his opinion to the world, whereas Sasuke took a more subtle approach to insults and jabs at his preferences. Still, they were starting to get along fairly well. One could almost say that the boys were on their way to becoming friends. Almost, but not quite. They still had too much between them to become the best of friends overnight, but maybe, in the future, if they could get over their differences, if they could agree to disagree on many things, if they could start to stand each other. Sasuke nearly ran into Naruto's back. He hadn't been watching where he was going, his eyes instead being trained to the ground, watching his feet. He looked up curiously to see a bright, rainbow-colored building. There were flowers everywhere, writing that looked like it was done by a second grader, chalk drawings covering the front entry, and a fence leading to a wood and metal playground peeking timidly from behind the building. Children screaming and laughing told tale that this was quite obviously a daycare center, if not a preschool building. The sign gave evidence to the former. Naruto grinned, his smile malicious and oddly twisted for someone whose grin could light up a third-world country for nearly a decade. See, this is where one of my good friends works, and I haven't seen him here for a while, so I'm going to go help him out with the little demons, he announced. His eyes told Sasuke that if he followed, he would be dragged into things as well. Sasuke didn't like children. Rather, he could stand them, but they had a habit of running screaming when he so much as glanced at them. Hence, he had never really spent time around the brats. It just didn't fit in with his personality. Still, he decided to follow Naruto in. He wondered which friend worked there. Right away, Lee and Gaara wouldn't work there. Lee would scare kids even more than Sasuke himself due to those bushes he called eyebrows, and Gaara's stare would kill a kid. That left Kiba, and he worked with puppies and possessed the energy needed to keep up with energetic children. He supposed that it would be Kiba that worked there. They walked into the place, Naruto talking quickly with a young woman at the desk. He handed Sasuke a visitor's pass, and they walked deeper into the building's confines with a smile and a nod. A handful of lefts and a right through a threshold, and then they entered a playroom full of screaming children running around chaotically. Toys of all shapes and sizes littered the floor. Plastic blocks stacked against each other haphazardly provided caves and places for children to hide. There were games and crayons and coloring books and multitudes of cushions and pillows littering the battlefield that made up the room. And, through it all, the children played. Naruto ran into the fray without a care. "Hey all! I'm back!" Cries of brother and Naru were sent through the air as each and every child made a mad dash to the blonde. Sasuke couldn't help but think of him as a magnet, and each child had somehow honed into him and found a place to cling to the laughing high schooler. Sasuke hung back, unsure about what to do. He didn't want their grubby, messy and germ-stained hands to wipe themselves all over himself. So he stood there, scowling and glaring at Naruto, who was acting like the idiot he was, rolling around and taking turns tickling and being tickled. One young boy, with messy red hair and bright, innocent eyes walked up to Sasuke and started staring at him. Sasuke turned his glare to the child, thinking that the boy would just run away crying. He was mildly surprised when the boy just cocked his head to the side with curiosity. "What's your name?" he asked. Sasuke debated not answering. "Sasuke Uchiha." The boy smiled, missing 2 front teeth and obviously not caring. "My name is Tatsue Kuwabara. Are you here with brother? Are you going to be our brother too?" he asked with all the naivete of a 5-year-old. Sasuke was at a loss for words at answering, but he was saved the strain by a new person entering, wearing jeans and a blue shirt, looking as if he would be better seen on a date than at a daycare. His red hair a bright contrast to the outfit he wore. Gaara walked into the room. It explained why Sasuke didn't terrify any of the brats, and he realized this with only a small, unused portion of his brain. The rest of his mind was too shocked at discovering a cold-hearted person like Araya. Gaara's gaze flickered to Sasuke, the only movement that acknowledged the brunette. Otherwise, he waded into the sea of children, pulling them off his friend. The kids obeyed the silent command with surprising speed, backing up obediently while still telling brother Naruto everything he had missed. Gaara stuck out a hand and helped Naruto to his feet. "It's been a while," he said simply. His gaze flickered once more to Sasuke, asking the silent question that he didn't vocalize. "Oh, we're still working on the project," he offered as an explanation. Gaara looked at him skeptically, but didn't say anything else to refute Naruto's claim. "We're going to have some stories," Gaara said over the noise made from little chattering voices. They immediately raised a cheer, scrambling to take places on the various pillows and seating mats placed chaotically about the place. 20 or so hands went up, eagerly waving to try and get the redhead's attention. "Tatsue," he called, picking the brave soul that had stood up to the infamous Uchiha stare. "I want the new guy to tell a story," he exclaimed, pointing to Sasuke. Sasuke blinked, and got an uneasy feeling as Naruto, Gaara, and all of the children looked at him expectantly. "I don't do stories," he said, glaring at Naruto for bringing him there. The children began to pout, whine, cry, and demand a tale from the stoic teen. Even Naruto joined in, flopping on a cushion and folding his legs under him. Sasuke became annoyed, but as he didn't know where the place was, and because he needed Naruto to get him back to familiar territory, he couldn't just leave. So he angrily shouted, "Fine, just shut up already," to the cheers of innocent kids and began to tell the first story that popped into his head. As soon as he finished, Naruto took a turn, and then, surprisingly, Gaara, before the cycle started all over again until the children's parents returned to pick them up, freeing Sasuke from the impromptu hell and allowing him to return to his home for some much-needed aspirin and sleep. It was dark. The night swept across the town, a town filled with mercenaries and children training to take the place of their elders. He was in the most expensive district, the one that he lived in, the one that held the most prestigious family. He was walking home, unable to get there fast enough. It seemed like he was walking in a dream. 1 minute, he was making his own innocent way to his house, and the next, he was looking upon the bodies of fallen family members. He was in the street just before his own, the one that harbored the branch members, aunts, uncles, cousins, and other extended relatives. They were all dead, littered across the lane in no pattern, bleeding from wounds that had taken their lives within moments. He was running, then, running to them, hoping that the killer hadn't made it to his house, hoping that he would find the same bloodbath. His bag hit his side, bouncing in an ominous tandem as his breathing became quicker. A stitch formed in his side, fear engulfing his heart.